It is 6:02 p.m. My name is Gabriel Harp, the chair of the Arbor Energy Commission. As chair, I'm calling this meeting to order. I'm participating from my home in Ann Arbor. Welcome to the September 10th, 2004 electronic meeting of the Energy Commission. We will conduct this meeting like in-person meetings. Commissioners, during roll call, please indicate your current location, and also during the meeting, please remain on camera, just as you would be visible during in-person meetings. Finally, mute your microphone when not speaking. Public comment will be via telephone only, and to speak during any of the public comment opportunities, please call one of the following two toll-free numbers, 877-853-5247 or 888-788-0099, and enter the meeting ID 956-8718-7876 on your phone. This information is also available on the published agenda in the public notices section of the city website, on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16, AT&T channel 99, and online at www.a2gov.org/watchctn. Joe, would you please read the land acknowledgement statement?
Yep. I acknowledge that the land the city of Ann Arbor occupies is the ancestral, traditional, and contemporary lands of the Anishinaabe, including Odawa, Wadney, and Wyandot peoples. I further acknowledge that our city stands, like almost all property in the United States, on lands obtained, generally in unconscionable ways, from indigenous peoples. The taking of this land was formalized by the Treaty of Detroit in 1807. Knowing where we live, work, study, and recreate does not change the past, but a thorough understanding of the ongoing consequences of this past can empower us in our work to create a future that supports human flourishing and justice for all individuals.
Thank you. And Joe, would you mind taking the roll call?
Yep. I've heard in advance that Councilmember Briggs will be unable to make it today. Commissioner Berkowitz.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Colvin Garcia.
Present in Arbor.
Chair Harp.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Vice Chair Hans.
Present in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Levin. Not seeing yet. Commissioner Mirsky.
Here in Seattle, Washington.
Commissioner Overpeck.
Here in Ann Arbor.
And Councilmember Radina.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Chair, you have a quorum. Back to you.
Thank you. We'll now move on to the approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda as posted and a second?
So moved.
Second.
Commissioners, second. Commissioners, please raise your hand if you'd like to propose changes or discuss an issue. Seeing no hands raised, all of those in favor of approving the agenda as posted, raise your hand and say aye.
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 All those opposed, please raise your hand and say no. Okay, the agenda is approved. We'll move on to the approval of the minutes. Is there a motion to approve the minutes as posted in a second? Commissioner Berkowitz? Is there a second?
Second.
Commissioner Mirsky, thank you. Commissioners, please raise your hand if you'd like to propose any changes or discuss an issue. Seeing no hands raised, all those in favor of approving the minutes as posted, raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. Okay, the minutes are approved. We will move on to the time for public input. This is an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you are watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. To electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. And please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
First up, we have caller ending in 010. There we go. Sorry about that. 010.
Hi, this is Wayne Appleyard, former member of the Energy Commission for about 26 years and chair for around 9 or so. And I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the Green Rental Housing Ordinance. First of all, 3 minutes is not enough time for me to really respond to all that's in the ordinance and what's been handed out. You have received something from John Mursky, and I totally agree with that. And you may hear something from Ken Garber, who's done some really wonderful work along with Rich Fine on this proposal or response to it. I want to read one thing. EB 11, strengthen housing code energy standards for rental properties. Rental properties are currently governed under Chapter 105 of the City Code, which regulates housing by establishing basic requirements for inspections, heating, lighting, and weatherization rental units. This plan recommends enforcing the current standards and expanding the housing energy code standards for rental properties. Because the rental inspection cycle of every 30 months is firmly established, the Ann Arbor already has the enforcement and compliance assistance structure in place to implement this change. More rigorous enforcement of the current code will greatly benefit both the condition and energy efficiency of the rental housing stock. Question is, what did I just read? I read EB 11 of the Ann Arbor Climate Action Plan from 2012. It is 2024. Once again, we have taken far too long to get to this place. Hasn't anybody ever heard of the emergency of climate change? We have to move faster. And it may mean that some of the things that don't reduce greenhouse gas emissions have to be slowed down in order to speed up the things that really make a difference. Time is running out. Thank you.
Thank you. Caller ending in 534.
Good evening. This is Tom Stolberg calling from 1202 Traver in Ann Arbor. I'm a landlord. That's my job. Relatively small landlord. We have mostly very old houses and a lot of duplexes, and we have a lot of room for improvement. This is going to mean a lot of work for us. But guess what? I'm totally for doing this. We need this change. And so what? I'm in business. Get to work, Tom. I was on the task force for this a few years ago, so I knew this was coming. I've been expecting this, and I'm glad to see it here before you today. I won't go into the details because, I've only got 3 minutes, like the last caller said. I do want to mention a couple quick things. We do have in our portfolio a number of affordable and workforce priced units. And whenever you're making any considerations, always consider that how the cost of work can impact the affordability of living. I know that's a difficult balance. Some of these items are going to cost money, and how can we make sure that it doesn't turn into a pass-through for higher rents for tenants? So I know some of you have that already in mind. I just want to remind you, and I look forward to however this gets implemented. We've got to do something. So I'm not going to be nitpicky about the little items. I would love to talk to any of you who want to talk at length. About half of you already have my contacts. If you need to contact me, it'd probably be easy to find out how to contact me and have a lengthy discussion. So mostly I will just listen tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you. There was another are off the line. So just noting we do have another opportunity for public comment at the end. So if they're able to rejoin, we will hold for them. So no further callers at this time.
Okay. Thank you, Joe. And thank you to the callers for those comments. Much appreciated. Tonight we have a presentation, and following that presentation, we'll open up for discussion on green rental housing, as some of the callers alluded to. And so tonight that presentation, I believe, is going to be driven by city staff, OSI staff, Joe Lange. Is that accurate?
Yep.
Okay. And so I'll hand it over to Joe in just a second. As commissioners are sort of thinking through and listening to the presentation, as we move into discussion, if it's possible to sort of bundle some of the comments, and we'll sort of go around the group partially just to sort of be efficient with our time, and get feedback. I know a lot of it will sort of come up through the discussion as well, but if you're able to sort of pull some of your comments together in the following discussion, that might help us just in terms of time. And then I'll also try to just maybe hold discussion on the resolution in support of the ordinance till after the sort of discussion of the presentation and the ordinance and the supporting materials itself, and just sort of keeping that potentially somewhat separated from the sort of main presentation and content. We aren't planning a vote or anything like that tonight, but we'll have some time for discussion around that as well, but we'll just keep that separate. So with that, I want to hand it off to Joe to lead us in the presentation and open up the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. The share screen here. All right. Yeah. So yeah, thanks for having me here. Well, I'm always here, but thanks for having me here to talk tonight. Want to talk about green rental housing, which again, a couple of folks alluded to. I know this has been a thing we've been talking about for a while, in the sense of it came up, and it's been a minute since we've talked about it, but I know it's a thing that has interest, and so I'm happy to be able to talk about it this time. For a little bit of run of show, just what we're going to do, I want to go through some of the background, again, why. I know some of the callers alluded to it too, but just why we are embracing this, why this is an action, why this is something that we are interested in going through, as well as talk about some of the program development, how it was developed over time. Just because, again, I know some folks were around the first time we talked about it, but others weren't. And, you know, even for those who were, a refresher is always helpful. We'll spend some time talking about, you know, what the policy is, what it looks like. You know, a lot of it's in the packet, so I'm not going to dive through like every specific detail in there, but happy to talk about them and just talk about some of the main components of it to help try to clear anything up as we go, as well as get a chance to talk a little bit about some of the resources that are already available as part of this, with, you know, more planned on the way, and then plenty of time for questions and discussions. If you have, like, you know, said hold questions till the end, but if you have like clarifying anything like that, happy to just jump in, happy to go through that at any point. As I know most of you are familiar with, but just in case anyone listening is not, you know, A20 core plan for all the work we do here at OSI, which is our plan to equitably achieve carbon neutrality by 2030, is kind of what the basis for where this comes through. There's a whole bunch of things in there, but what I want to notably talk about today are two of the strategies within, which are switching our appliances and vehicles over, you know, off of fossil fuels to electric, which can be renewably powered, as well as strategy 3, which is significantly improving the energy efficiency of our buildings. Notably, within that strategy 3 on the energy efficiency side, we do have a specific action calling out promoting the green rental housing program, which we're talking about here today, which again is reducing the energy usage in rental properties within the city. And the reason this is in the plan and why we're going down this kind of path is because if you look at our greenhouse gas emissions, you know, fluctuates a little bit over time, but as of, you know, our most recent one, we see just under 70% of our building emissions come from, our emissions come from buildings. Notably, that number includes all buildings. This isn't just residential buildings, but when we do talk about residential buildings, we do see that over half, or 55%, are rental units, which is, you know, pretty big. It's a majority of our residential units. And so with that, in the fact that there is not any existing initiatives targeting these emissions, we knew that there has to be something that is looking at that. And the core thing about this that also makes it tricky is this concept called the split incentive, which basically says that those who are able to make the change are not necessarily those who are able to get the benefit of the change in some cases. The way to think about it is, in a single family home, say you're the homeowner, you own the home, you're able to make any improvements. You can, improve your insulation. You can get a more efficient, heating unit, all those kind of things. And then over time, you can, if there's energy savings, you're the one who recoups those energy savings. So it can make sense. You get a return on your investment over time through that saving. But in the case of a lot of rental units, not all of them, there's, different situations and whatnot, but in the majority of cases, that doesn't necessarily happen. The property owner is the one who owns the property, as the name states there. So they're the one who are able to make these upgrades. They're the ones who can do renewable energy, electrification, energy efficiency upgrades. But oftentimes they are not the one who pays the utility bills. So they don't necessarily see that direct benefit from the reduction in utility bills that can help pay off that kind of initial capital improvement. There's, there could be potentially indirect things where, they're able to pass on savings. They're able to, better promote their options and have an increase in interest and who's in the properties and things like that. But that direct savings on utility bills isn't necessarily there. On the other side, you got the tenant who lives in the unit. They're, generally not able to make those big structural changes. They might be able to do some things, put like little bit of weather stripping or, cover up windows, little things like that that can have an impact, but they can't make those big changes that we see the biggest impact from. However, they are the ones who are paying the utility bill, and, they can't necessarily do anything to change that outside of, some of those smaller things. You can also think of it from their perspective, because again, in some cases, the property owner or landlord is the one who does pay the utility bill. And so, they are more likely to see some of these changes because they see that savings. But then you can have, situations where, say, you got a tenant who's in there, and because they don't pay the bill, they're not thinking about as much about how they're using their energy, and that can result in kind of wasted energy use from the behavioral side. And all of this again kind of coalesces in what happens is these types of units get upgrades at a slower pace than we see in other types of buildings. Again, in single family homes, we see these kind of upgrades happen more frequently just because there is that financial incentive to do this, even though there is an upfront cost. There are those savings over time. So we see those changes made more frequently. And so that's kind of what we're trying to address through kind of this policy structure. The other thing I just want to, note is we do have existing processes for all this. We do have an existing rental housing inspection team. They do these inspections, as a caller noted, got the 30-month cycle. There can be an extension for passing on the first try. It has an existing rental inspection process. You can see some of the stuff here. In general, these all relate to health, safety, that kind of stuff. And everything that is on the list has to be met for the unit to be rented. Additionally, there are some of those existing things, again, as callers mentioned, are some of the winterization requirements in rental housing. These are all in place. Everything I say, from here on out, none of this is getting replaced. None of this is getting removed. This is all still in place. All will still be part of it. Everything is just being added on top of that. And then the last thing I just want to note for background is that, again, this isn't the only thing we are doing. Rental housing is not the only type of building that we are addressing. All the different buildings we have in our community operate kind of in different ways. They have different things that work, different things that don't work. When we're trying to address things from an energy efficiency standpoint, as well as just reducing carbon emissions. And so there's different structures in place for them. Again, I know many of you are familiar, but just in case folks aren't, on the commercial building side, any building greater than 20,000 square feet needs to go through the benchmarking process where they track their energy and water data. On the single family home side, we have the home energy rating disclosure program, where homes that are up for sale have to get a home energy score and report that out to potential home buyers. And then now we're getting into green rental housing, which is kind of the third of this, core energy efficiency criteria across our buildings here. Lots of other work going on throughout this across a whole bunch of other different things we've talked about, but these are just kind of those, building related policies that we're talking about. So in terms of how the policy was created, we started with, where most things start is just looking up and seeing what is out there. We worked with a couple of these different national leaders who are doing work in all sorts of things across, the decarbonization sector and sphere, to really just understand what types of policies were out there already, seeing what's worked, what are some of the best practices that other communities have done, and for those that have, seeing how they design these programs, how they've implemented them, what are the results of those, how they have been working. To do, again, just get a sense of what is out there and making sure we're not doing anything that, has already been developed. We're not creating something from scratch. We're using what has worked and also making sure we don't do anything that hasn't worked. as part of that, we looked at a couple different cities. There's more than just the ones here, but some of them, they've got different programs in place, policies in place that have some over 10 years they've been going. And again, just really diving in to see what they have, and importantly what's worked, but just importantly what has not worked. Making sure that if they have something that's worked really well, we're able to take that and repurpose it for our own needs. But again, just importantly, what didn't work. We don't want to go down a path of doing something if it's proven to not be effective, because that's not a good use of anyone's time with that. And all throughout this, just really making sure that we're looking at what could work here in Ann Arbor. I know, we're not necessarily unique necessarily, but we do have different situations, different circumstances that some of these other communities might not have to deal with, or just different scenarios. So making sure we're not just copy and pasting something from another place, because we have a different set of scenarios that we need to consider. So when thinking about those scenarios, just kind of looking at the context of where we are in Ann Arbor, for our rental units, there's about 31,500 units across about 8,500 properties here in Ann Arbor. In looking at, kind of when they're built, where they're at, we find that the median year built is 1964. And, some of these units date back to the 1850s. Obviously not the common, but there are some there. And why this is kind of important to note is because there were no energy efficiency requirements at all in Michigan building codes prior to 1977. So even though there's been plenty of units throughout this time, even before that, that have been updating, been doing things, been having, energy efficiency improvements during that time, there's some that entirely possible they're just in that kind of same spot where they were before then, before we had these codes that were designed, to increase our standards of health, safety, security, and energy efficiency, to get kind of that modern levels of comfort that we're all familiar with, that also, again, leads to those reductions in energy usage and greenhouse gases. So with that, kind of taking all that information, we convened a task force. Again, we had one of the callers who called in, who was a member of that, to take all this information, learn more, discuss with each other, and be able to tailor this policy to Ann Arbor. There were representatives from tenant advocacy groups, landlord advocacy groups, low-income housing, as well as our building department. And within this, we also had folks who were qualified architects, engineers, and licensed builders. So we're making sure we're getting that building science side of things within this. Again, they saw a bunch of presentations, looked through a bunch of the research, all these kind of things to just sort through, again, everything that's out there and begin defining what are those challenges, what are those opportunities, how do we address that split incentive, and again, how do we do it in a way that works for Ann Arbor and for all the different stakeholders involved to the best, we can find some sort of compromise with that. During that, they concluded by developing a set of recommendations. Again, these came before folks, including at the Energy Commission, but what they were a set of these policy elements that were targeting the appliance efficiency, again, looking at the individual appliances and how they get upgraded over time, how we look at the overall efficiency of the units through a couple different pathways that, again, address how efficient the overall unit was, some information on occupant weatherization, as well as how to publicly disclose this information. So taking all of that, taking those policy recommendations, those were shared out, including an initial draft of the checklist, which was used to for that unit efficiency side of things. And we collected a whole bunch of feedback through this process. We had a public survey that had over 100 responses. We had a couple different public meetings in which anyone could attend. We had multiple stakeholder group meetings, including meeting with the Energy Commission a couple times, as well as some of the different landlord and apartment groups in the community. And all throughout, we got a bunch of different feedback, but two of the things I just kind of want to highlight that we got were, they were around, one, not really being enough time to meet some of the compliance things that were in place. We're thinking about building cycles and upgrade cycles in, a rental unit. Having 6 months was really fast for some folk. There might not be a resident turnover in that time period. At the time, we were, we still have in some cases contractor shortages or appliance shortages and things like that. So it was in some cases not necessarily feasible to do in that period potentially. As well as, again, feedback word again from Energy Commission included was some of the checklist felt inconsistent throughout. Kind of felt like some things were just slapped on with points, and they weren't necessarily equivalent to either the work required to make those kind of changes or the impact that they generate in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. So we had that, a lot of other feedback in a lot of different ways, all was really helpful. And with that, what we've done to address that is, one, we've reworked the checklist. with the goal of making it more consistent, backed by data, having more of the points be equivalent to the best of our ability. Also having a little bit of a phase-in period, just so, we have something in place. So immediately as it's, going into effect, there is the opportunity to get started, start making changes, but have a little bit more flexibility to make some of the bigger changes that might need to take place over a longer period of time. And then, some of those other ones like the appliance upgrades and the weatherization parts were kind of included into the checklist. Just that way we have one system that's going about. It's all in one place. It goes through one enforcement process. It just makes it a little easier to manage than trying to track down a bunch of different parts through systems that aren't already in place. So what this looks like, I'm going to talk about the big thing is the energy efficiency requirements. And basically what this is setting an energy efficiency target for rentals throughout one of that I'll talk more about. And the way it's designed is to give choice and flexibility for compliance. We know that, not all rental units are the same. And so there needs to be some flexibility to make sure they're doing the things that work the most effectively for those units, instead of just doing a one size fits all approach that might not be effective for different units. And then again, all of this is added to the existing pre-inspection checklist and the inspection process to make it all just kind of streamlined. It's in one system that already exists, people are familiar with. While there's new requirements, the core process is still the same to try to eliminate confusion and make it, again, more streamlined as we go. Again, this doesn't eliminate any of the things that are already in place. This isn't replacing anything in the inspection process. This isn't replacing any of the other requirements. Those are all still there. This is just on top of that. And again, all this is with the core goals of, there's nothing related to efficiency currently in the checklist. And we're also just trying to, equalize the market expectations for rentals. A lot of them are in good spots. There are some that are, in a pretty good spot. And there's some that are, might be a little bit behind in terms of their level of efficiency. And so we're just trying to bring everyone up to kind of that, at least a certain level to make sure we've got comfortable apartments, efficient apartments, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions with that. The way that this works is there's two different pathways depending on, again, what works best for the, for the property owner. The first is a checklist pathway, which we'll spend a bit of time talking about what that looks like. But basically, this is a checklist that was developed by us here at the Office of Sustainability and Innovations with consultation from, some experts in the field. And again, the goal, there's a bunch of different points on there. Each item is worth a certain amount of points. And to pass, you need to have a minimum amount of points on that checklist. The other is the home energy rating system pathway. For this, you have to undergo a home energy rating system assessment, or HERS, through a home energy rater and achieve a minimum HERS score with that. The way these look, the first one, again, that for the home energy rating system pathway, what the unit would need to go through is they get a home energy rating score. Very common scoring system. It's used across the country. And what you got to do is you go through, the inspector will go through, look at all the different things, the appliances, the energy efficiency, air sealing, all that kind of stuff, and come up with a final score of this. These can range in value. You can see 0 is, the lower it is, the better. 0 is a zero energy home. And so for this, you need to get a score of at least 110 on that checklist, on the score, 110 or lower. The next, and I'll spend a little bit more time talking about this just because this, again, is developed by us rather than, a national score there, is the checklist pathway. And what this is, again, it's a checklist developed by Office of Sustainability and Innovations and some of our, our collaborating experts. And again, what it is, there's these different items, they have points within them, and you can pick and choose the different items to get the points to the score that works. I will talk more in detail about these different points, but just noting there's a couple different sets of points. They work in a couple different ways. And again, at no point do you need to get all of the points on here. You don't need to get all of a certain number of points in one category, something like that. And in fact, you don't even need to know that these points exist or how they work in this way. This is purely just to show people that there is a reason for these points. This is how we got to those points. And if people want to know that, that information is out there. But all that matters is that, the point that's associated with the action there. So the first one is we have a set of planning points. And the reason we have this is to make sure that upgrades are being done in an efficient manner. We don't want to have people going into a situation where they just look at a checklist, they see the things that get the most points and do that. In a lot of cases, that's going to work well, but there's also other cases where that might not be the best process for that unit. So we don't want people going out and either spending a bunch of money for something that doesn't work well or just doing upgrades for the sake of doing upgrades, but rather we want things to be done in an efficient and a sustainable manner. And so they can go through and either do an energy assessment, which again says where the unit is at, and then using that they can make a plan based on how they're going to make those changes over time. So again, it can be done in an efficient and sustainable manner instead of again just going out there and making changes for the sake of making changes and getting a certain amount of points. The next, and I can go into this in more detail if we want, but I'm in general, we have a model section. And basically what this is going through and doing the best we can to find if you do an action, how much greenhouse gas reductions can you expect from that and giving points according to it. So we worked with some consulting experts to go through ResStock, which is a building tool developed by the National Renewable Energy Laboratory that basically looks at all the different buildings across the country. We narrowed it down to Michigan, and then look at how these different actions impacted it. So we went through, did all these different things, and as you do them, pulled out for each item roughly how much it reduces the energy consumption of a unit based on making that individual change. A little tricky because you're trying to, a lot of these have dependencies with them, so trying to break them up as best we can, and then doing that, you get that energy consumption reduction. And then looking at the overall fuel mix to see how much of a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions you can expect from that. So that's how this went about. Again, it's roughly a 1-to-1. Say if something gets a 10% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, it gets 10 points as a result of this. And then the last is this section of non-modeled points. And the reason we have those is because there are things we know that do have an impact. Maybe it isn't, as big of an impact with greenhouse gas emissions directly, but there are different things where it impacts the health, the safety, and sustainability overall. All important things that are in A20, that are in our sustainability goals. But we might not necessarily just be able to model those 1-to-1, or there can be such a discrepancy between different sizes of places that, again, you can't assign a certain number for that. So these are all consistent across. They have the same amount of points. And some of the examples are things like using electric lawn equipment. Again, we know things like, a gas leaf blower. We've already addressed that to some extent. Gas mowers, things like that have an awful lot of pollution from them for the size of what they are. And by switching to something like electric, we know we're reducing emissions. We're making a more healthy, environment, as well as reducing things like noise pollution. Again, there's not a 1-to-1 thing we can do for every unit roughly to see kind of what that looks like, but we do know it's important. So it gets points on the checklist. Similarly, there's tenant education in there, which is important for two reasons. Because like I said, one, the behavior within a unit does have an impact, and it's important to account for that. And so by doing kind of education, again, we can behave in a more, more sustainable manner. It also, as we were going through the process, there is a portion of what could have been in the modeled checklist, which is plug loads, which is basically all the different devices that are plugged into outlets. That can vary so much between different residents. And so we wanted to account for that in some way. And this is kind of how we have that. So that's why it has a higher number of points than some of the other things, just because their behavior includes things like how long they're running their TV, streaming service, computer, monitors, all those kind of things, which can vary and isn't, again, directly modeled in another way. So you have the overall checklist in your packet. I'm happy to go through it later if we want to, kind of go through things from there. But just in general, here's kind of what here's what it looks like. This isn't like a final, beautiful version necessarily. We'll, work on that as we go. So of course, if people have ideas for how to lay it out better, that'd be great to hear. But in general, you have the option, the different item, whatever it is, how many points it gets, and then what you need to do to meet that. This goes across all these different categories. And again, just noting, people do not need to score every single point. And even though there's categories that's just kind of broken up for ease of, finding things, seeing what they look like, you don't have to get a certain number of points in each category to achieve compliance necessarily. So it's just kind of, guidance there. Those are what the points are, and there's a total that needs to be met. And the way it works is kind of, again, like we said, a 2-phase process that have different point requirements for those 2 phases. The first would go into effect 6 months after the legislation is passed, if it is passed. And from that time period till the next phase, all units would have to get a score of 30 points. There's a whole bunch of different ways this can be done. A lot of units will already be in a good spot. Some might not be, but a lot are going to be pretty good. And if folks are sitting there and not quite sure how to start, the easiest way that we can see people starting is if they're doing some of that doing an energy assessment, again, seeing where the unit is at, how it's currently performing, creating a plan for how to get that unit into compliance and what kind of upgrades they want to take place over time, and doing that tenant education that'll be developed by the Office of Sustainability and Innovations here. Those will get them good for there. Of course, there's other ways to do it. That's just one pathway among many. And again, this is to give that time to get everyone set up to make sure we're getting them into the system, getting them thinking about this, getting them making improvements where improvements need to be made, and set them up for that final phase of compliance, which would happen, again, 3 years after this policy goes into effect, at which point 80 points would need to be met. This could be done, again, in whole different ways, depending on the situation. Again, a lot of buildings are doing very well and probably will have to make no changes as a result of this. But there are some that, might need more meaningful work, and we want to make sure we have processes in place to help them with that. And then regardless of which pathway folks undertake, that will just need to be publicly disclosed. Reason being, well, one, the inspection results that already take place are already publicly available. This is just one more thing that's part of it. They will also be publicly available through there. And we're going to work to do as best we can as an office to make sure that these are, more readily findable by folks. Again, just because something's already out there doesn't mean people find it. Especially, you get people moving from out of state into an apartment. Sure, they're not looking for it in a lot of cases. So making sure we can do things to try to make that more publicly available and more accessible for folks who might be searching for it. All with the goal of making sure tenants are, better able to understand what they're looking for. Similar to, again, a car, you want to know, what kind of you're getting into with the efficiency of the car before purchasing. Try to do a similar thing for apartments. Again, regardless of the pathway chosen, compliance will work, again, with the existing rental inspection process. Prior to the inspection itself, the property manager or whoever is responsible for doing all that will be submitting this information to the inspector. There's a form they will fill out, they will submit, they'll say, here's what I've done, here's how, here's the points or the HERS score, here's how I've achieved it. And here's documentation that can show that I've achieved it to the extent they have that documentation. The inspector will then come out and confirm that, yes, those things have taken place. In the event a unit does not achieve that, the required point total or HERS score, a fine will be issued, and that fine will be a recurring fine each day until a unit is brought into compliance. Here as an office, our goal is never to issue fines, never to, issue compliance, anything like that. We really want to make sure that people are compliant at the beginning. Our goal is reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, not issuing fines. So we want to make sure we're doing everything we can to help people be, prepared for it. We want to make sure they're reducing their emissions in advance of this. So with that in mind, we do have some resources that are already available. We have 2 different resource hubs, one for landlords and property owners, one for renters. The landlord and property owner one has a bunch of things on there that are related to financial resources, different grants, different rebates, different tax credits, different financing options, all those things that are out there to help them make changes should they need to make these changes. There's also educational resources on how to connect to contractors, how to know what's the most beneficial improvements to be made, how to go about financing if they need to do financing, as well as an incentive database that can help continuously find new financial resources. And if folks find financial resources that aren't on this page, they can let me know. I'll add them as soon as I can, as well as some of the different local resources that are out there to help folks with this, such as, again, the 2030 district we've talked about, who can help people understand kind of where they're at and connect them to different resources from there. And then lastly, for renters, again, we have a renter resource hub where we have different energy efficiency strategies, things you can do in your apartment to, behave in a more energy efficiency way, look at different, different strategies, things like that, as well as during the apartment hunting process of, what kind of questions to ask, what things to look into, so you can be thinking about how to set up yourself for success. While this program doesn't touch on residence halls, we do have information in here on, what folks can do in a resident hall to, be more efficient, even if you're not necessarily, paying the utility bill. There's all things we can do to do our part to improve efficiency there, as well as some other different resources. I've talked a lot, so that's all that I have in terms of the presentation. Ready to open it up to questions, feedback. I know I've gotten some in advance and happy to kind of go through some of those as we go. And also just, noting while there was kind of like Chair Harp was saying, while there was a resolution that was attached, we're not planning on voting on that, anything like that tonight. Just noting that that was kind of one that had been brought up previously. So just resharing, noting that was something that was brought up. I just updated it slightly for, some of the numbers changed and some of the policy things changed. So just noting that is there. We're not planning on voting on it at this time. But like I said, I have some questions in advance. I can start going through some of those, but I'm just going to open it up first to anyone here for now.
I think Councilmember Radina has a hand raised.
Yeah, thanks. I just wanted to lead things off with a thank you. I expect that we'll have a lot of conversation tonight, but I really am just appreciative of all of the work that has gone into this over a period of years now, and wanted to thank staff for their work. I know that this has been through a series of processes, from public engagement and committee work to staff work to legal reviews and all of those things to make sure that what you guys are presenting is the strongest and most legally defensible option that we can move forward. And so I just want to give my appreciation to all of the staff that have put time and energy into this, as well as the volunteers. We heard from some of them this evening, but really just appreciate all of the hard work and energy that has gone into this. So thank you for that.
Commissioner Levin.
Yes, I would also echo what Commissioner Radina was saying, Councilperson Radina. Thanks for that. It was very informative. I have a couple just kind of basic questions to start with. When we were looking at the phase 1 part, just kind of like, do you have like a rough idea of like what percentage are already at that? It seems like a pretty low bar to meet, and I understand it's just getting people used to the program and how it works, but are we thinking that's like 90%? Like, any idea?
I don't have a specific number in terms of things, and that's also kind of part of why we're looking at it in this way. Is one, we just don't know what we don't know. We have a general sense of like, some are performing very well, some are not performing well, and this kind of can help give us that kind of information to be like, yes, this is where we're at, and if it's severely underperforming, we can kind of make adjustments from there. But yeah, we just don't know a lot of that information.
Okay. And then, so let's say they meet the level. Let's say we're in phase 3 already, and they've either done improvements or whatever, that they're in compliance. Is there like follow-ups in the future that where we'll like continue to, like, how would that work exactly? How's that contemplated working?
Yeah, from then on out in both of these, again, the enforcement is assessed during the inspection. Those inspections occur again every 30 months. You can get an extension again if it passes. And so yeah, once we enter phase 2 is indefinite. It continues throughout. So every time they go for their inspection, that gets checked at all those periods. So it's always checked. They always have to meet that score from then on out.
But it's not just like like an energy audit. It's just them like, showing what they have done in the past. And
yeah, and once you get to that, again, it's different things like, is there a heat pump? That gets you a bunch of points. Do they have that insulation? It has all those different things in there. And so, it's not just doing the assessment, not just that. It can be any of those things. Yeah.
Okay. One more question. In terms of the incentives, sorry if I missed this in the materials, but is there any incentives they get for structuring a contract with the tenants that might create more incentives for the tenants to use less energy, like the tenants responsible for 100% of the utility bill or something like that, or maybe even they split the utility bill?
Yeah, there's not any like direct things like of how it, goes into the lease or anything like that, just because that was one of those things we were looking at and was a little murky in terms of, what we can legally tell them to put in a lease. But that's kind of why we have that renter sustainability session. And again, that would be a thing. It's going to be developed by us. We already have a lot of the resources we're putting into place, just trying to figure out how to best do that. So that way we're focusing on that behavioral change, focusing on, what folks are doing. because we know it can have an outsized impact. Naturally, if you have a very inefficient building, what you do inside of it's not going to make too big of a difference. But if you have an efficient unit, making sure that people are acting in an efficient manner does have can have a big difference. And so that's why we have that in there to kind of couple all those different things. There is also at the bottom of the checklist, there's called unlisted innovation measures. If a landlord property manager comes forward and says hey, we have this really innovative leasing structure, or we have this really innovative way that we're doing XYZ that I can't think of because I'm not someone who's a property manager, and says we're doing this and it related to that, they could potentially get points for something like that.
Thanks.
Joe, I'd like to jump in just with a question, sort of some background and context. And I noticed in one of the slides, I have a question and then I have a comment. In one of the slides, I think there was some indication of sort of either balancing prescriptive and performance-based measures in the checklist, or the approach to it overall. And what I think I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around is the sort of choice, or sort of the thinking and the context around the choices, particularly of the sort of checklist approach, which I think maybe tends to be more prescriptive, and as opposed, and maybe in contrast to, I would say, and I'm sort of making this up, but an approach where you would look at the actual energy use and fuel mix that the unit is using as a sort of outcome for whether it's use intensity or efficiency or whatever that might be. And I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about that sort of overall general approach in the program design, and sort of how maybe the checklist approach sort of helps that, or is a choice that's distinct or different from that. Because one might imagine, both approaches, but obviously that's a pretty significant design choice, I think, from my reading.
Sure. Yeah, and there's definitely, I think with both of them, right? Like I said, right now there's those two different ones. You got the HERS rating essentially, or the checklist, and there's the ability to choose which one makes the most sense. We've seen in some of the one of the ones we looked at, Boulder, they had a similar thing, and what they found is less than 2% of the people who went through it used the HERS rating. Almost everyone was using the checklist. Like I said, very few used it. Even those who did kind of switched over to using the checklist kind of after. Part of it, and why we're kind of going down this, is one, it's just easier to see, if I do make this change, I will receive this number of points, and so that's kind of helpful. Rather than, while I think in the, the perfect scenario, the scientific scenario is to be able to, exactly show this is how much energy you reduce, this is how much XYZ has happened. That can be harder to do from again, the individual property manager's perspective of being able to show that change happening. And in some cases can feel like a bit of a risk on their sense too, where they're okay, I'm going to go improve I'm going to add insulation in the attic, into the walls, things like that. I'm going to spend however much, without really knowing how much it's going to change. And so there's a level of risk associated with that. There can be a fear of that, and that can prevent people from kind of going forward and doing that without knowing how that's going to impact them, as opposed to, again, saying, here's a checklist. If you do this, you get this many points, you get this much closer to compliance. And that's kind of the reason that we saw in those other cities of why they were going down the checklist pathway, because it was helpful to see from that perspective. So that's kind of why we settled on that.
And just as a follow-up, is there a mechanism at all for then understanding the sort of impact to sort of energy use intensity, or fuel use intensity, or energy efficiency, beyond the checklist itself, in terms of the actual performance of the rental units themselves? Either in this program,
sure,
or other programs.
Some of it, yeah, and especially if it's one of the larger multifamily units, again, if it's greater than 20,000 square feet, it goes through benchmarking. You can potentially see some of those changes through that as they go through that. Otherwise, again, the majority of the points are, close to majority of the points are coming from a modeled thing. So we can roughly say that, yes, they're reducing it by, by this much going through those measures. Again, I would love to have, however much budget to be able to go through or just, require people to go through and their data from all the things and all the changes they're making. But just kind of, yeah, some of the stuff that, as we were going through the reality of what we were able to do and what was able to be gleaned from kind of, or, what data was able to be provided. This kind of is the route that, was the most effective from, being able to make those changes and see as best we can.
Thanks. And I'll just add a brief comment, which is, I think, as I was reading the guidelines, I think it's in the guidelines that the disclosure is posted on the building inspection permits site. And what I was starting to think about was a sort of analogy that I see in a lot of, hotels, motels, Airbnbs, even some homes that are rented out. And I think this was something that Stuart, the author and journalist Stuart Brand, sort of wrote about, which is this idea of the home book, or a book or a binder or something that sits with the house or the building or the structure and sort of maintains the memory of things that have changed and uses and sort of retrofits and all kinds of things. And I think maybe it's a good analogy to consider in terms of that some of the educational aspects of the checklist in particular is the availability of that kind of information in the place where it's sort of used and makes it more sort of mutually available between the renters, the landlord, the inspectors as they come and visit the house, and sort of how that information might be updated. I'll put some more description of that and feedback that I'll send over email, but I just wanted to draw attention to that because I think it's it's potentially an important opportunity also for empowering, I think, not only the renters, but the landlords as well with the sort of types of information that they can both sort of use to sort of nudge each other in the right direction.
Yeah, definitely. And I appreciate that too. And I know this was, you said, John, I know we got questions I haven't answered of yours yet, but one of the ones that was brought up was, what is being done to, incentivize people going even higher than what's on the checklist. And that is a thing we've started having some discussions with some both internal, external partners, talking to our buildings department to see, just in general, again, one, how can we make these things more available? Like I said, it's great having it online on a permitting website, but how easy is that to find for people or even to know what to look for? So seeing what potential different ways we could do, whether that being, creating some sort of, tiered system saying like, oh, you get bronze, silver, gold once you reach different tiers of saying you're doing this well, things like that. And then, having whether it be, plaque stickers, something more sustainable than printing something out, and being able to use that in marketing materials and being able to show like, hey, we're this rated property, we're this efficient, we can, do things like that. We've also started to talk with some of the folks at University of Michigan. They have a lot of different resources that are out there to help students find off-campus housing. And so working with them to, be able to use their systems to kind of integrate this score into that system. Again, with some, sort of explanation in there again of what that score means and, what things are to kind of help with, students who are looking for, rentals as well to be able to find, housing that is more efficient if that's, a priority of theirs. So looking through all those different ways, and yeah, folks have different ideas for how to, better promote that, how to better show that, how to, enhance that interaction. Would definitely be open to hearing things like that. So I appreciate that.
Commissioner Murski?
Thank you. First of all, I'll start out with the fact, as mentioned earlier, that I provided input that hopefully all of you have seen in your in baskets. If you haven't had a chance to peruse that, I encourage you to do so. I don't plan on regurgitating all that, but I'd like to make some broad comments about the rental housing program and some of the concerns that I laid out in this document. First of all, I want to make it clear to everyone and that I'm totally supportive of the green rental housing program. This is absolutely needed. I think all of you, if you recall, I've been asking for a review of the green rental housing program by the Environment, or the Energy Commission every 2 or 3 months for the last 2 years or so. So this absolutely is necessary. I think it's important to consider context. First of all, the 820 plan has the following targets. In strategy 2, action 1, 25% of rental properties have fully electrified. Also in the same strategy and action, electricity powering these units is 100% renewable energy. By the way, these are all targets for 2030. Strategy 3, action 1, 80% of tenant occupied homes have achieved a 20% reduction in electricity usage and a 15% reduction in natural gas usage. And then the strategy 3 action number 8, which is the green rental housing program itself. This was covered on a slide that Joe showed earlier, is a 10% reduction in energy usage attributable just to this program. So there are very, very high targets. They're necessary targets. A couple of other things regarding to context. I think we all know that we have a housing affordability issue. So this is one thing that we have to keep in mind when we design this program and make recommendations to City Council. I think we also have to recall that we're not meeting our greenhouse gas reduction targets. We had a 1% reduction from 2022 to 2023. If you look back to 2015, we've averaged about 1.5% a year. If you at the old simple greenhouse gas inventory, that 1% per year roughly since that time frame. This is a huge lever. It's by the way, oops. Are you hearing me? My internet
you went away for a second, but you're back now.
Okay, good. Yep. Okay. This is a huge lever. Joe covered that in his slides. It really emphasized how important this is. It's one of the few really major levels that we have to drive action in the building sector remaining. So it's really important that we focus on this and we do a really good job with the program that's proposed. I want to also state that there are really excellent elements of the program as is. Indeed, it's significantly better than the program that was presented to the Energy Commission in March of 2022. So that's 2.5 years ago. So work has been done, but we've also lost 2.5 years. This program in the 820 plan was supposed to have been approved in 2021 and was supposed to have taken effect in 2022 or starting in 22. So we're obviously way behind that. And if you look at the 3-year timetable for achieving the 20 points, it's likely that we're not going to see any measurable impact or at least significant impact until maybe 2028 or something like that. Another thing that's really good is the fact that we have 2 pathways. That was in the original plan. The checklist pathway point allocation is really much improved. It really is based on, as Joe showed, some science behind it, and that's really good. The fact that a plan is not required, but receives a lot of points makes a lot of sense, and the tenant education also makes sense. I have a number of other concerns, though, that I want to point out, and I'm not going to repeat, like I said, what's in the email and in the attachments. But in my view, the thresholds are low. The HERS threshold is 110. It's appropriate that everybody know that that's based on a score of 100. That's tied to the 2006 International Energy Code. So that's already an 18-year-old code. It's not, there's no stepwise targets other than that. There's no targets past 3 years from now. There's no differentiation by age of the unit. I know that adds complexity. So in stating that, I recognize that cuts 2 different ways. But the biggest concern is, as outlined in the attachment that I sent, is that I'm very concerned, as others are, that this will not drive the necessary energy conservation measures, renewable energy adoption, or electrification, because landlords can cherry pick measures, and that's not going to lead to the kinds of reductions that we really need given the context that we're in. In my view, we need a program that's going to really drive action, that's going to lead to significant, tangible greenhouse gas reductions, recognizing the context of a split incentive system. In my view, the EC should not endorse the program as it is. There is really a lot of good material there, but there's a lot of, in my view, tweaks that can be done before we approve a resolution recommending that City Council adopt the program as it currently stands. If you dig into the documents that I provided, there's a lot of little things that need to be addressed. There's small corrections and sort of licensed energy assessors. They should be certified, little things like that. Those kinds of things need to be done. There's also some other things. This would cover sororities and fraternities. There's some group housing in those situations. It's not really clear how those would be done. So there's really a number of different things, from sort of high level issues that need to be addressed to lower level issues. That's all I'll have to say for the evening, unless really I feel moved to comment on somebody else's comment, but I wanted to share all of that with you. Thanks for the opportunity to do so.
Yeah, definitely want to say, thank you for that. I know, I was looking through it, and, a lot of those, especially you're saying some of the things like, yes, will be updated, because that makes a ton of sense, and clarify. Some of the group housing ones, I had some stuff in there, especially around like the dryers and stuff like that, and wanted to try to make things clear, but I know it might not be for all of them. So I might, go back and make some of those changes. I do want to say one thing before jumping to Commissioner Colvin Garcia. Just again, noting in terms of framing context and all that kind of stuff on the program, especially around, the point totals and how, we got to them. And again, noting, as we've all said, we've all noted throughout, even how people are, it's like the core goal of this is to improve the energy efficiency, resulting in the greenhouse gas emissions reductions from that. But I also do want to recognize the context that we are in. I know we've talked about this in a couple of different meetings, a couple of different programs on what we are able to do as a city government, how far we can go, especially as it relates to some of the different Michigan building codes and what we're able to go up against with that. And that's frankly a large reason why this has taken so long, is, naturally, one, we were, yes, adjusting the checklist, but two, we were trying to find every, pathway we could to make this into a program that is able to have the impact that we wanted to have, while also doing it in a way that is legally compliant, making sure it can be a program that can exist, and doing that in a way that is able to then have as much impact as we can under that setting. And I do also want to note that, again, as talk about a couple of different ones, again, this isn't the only thing we are doing. While this is, a thing that can be put in place, a thing that we can do, and a thing that, can have some sort of compliance with it, we are, seeing improvements in some of the other areas. Just, to talk about a couple of things that I know these aren't necessarily, for every single housing unit, every rental housing unit, but talking about the home energy rebates, we've seen a couple of landlords who are already taking advantage of those for their, the houses that they rent out. And we're seeing them install heat pumps. We're seeing them install, new levels of insulation, updating things like that. So, we're seeing some of that improvement already. We've also been talking to some of the larger building owners and developers across the different, sizes of rental properties, connecting them to different financial and technical resources to make improvements. We've submitted a couple of different grants where we're looking at trying to, again, find funding opportunities to help people, make improvements where they might need to be made. So a lot of work is being done. And even if, the kind of the numbers, they feel, a little, low potentially, again, some of that's from the context we're in. But what is in there is, something that we feel we are able to make a viable policy, again, given that landscape, but also just as importantly, have a framework and a connection point out there that can kind of bring people to this change. In some cases, landlords aren't thinking about energy efficiency improvements or anything like that, but having a policy in place can connect them to that. They see it, they see what's happening, and can then think about changes that could go, again, even above and beyond what is required in the checklist. So just wanted to note that these are all things we've been considering, and we, appreciate hearing the feedback on. And this is kind of the result that we've gotten to, kind of based on all those different considerations. So, but thank you for bringing that up, and I know you and others have brought it up as well. So we do hear you, and we do feel that.
Commissioner Colton Garcia.
Thank you very much. And thanks so much for the work that you're doing, moving this forward. And albeit it is definitely much later than what many of us have been requesting. I am curious more at this point, after the comments that have already been submitted, and thanks to your work, Commissioner Murski, and sharing this with the rest of the commission. What is the plan moving forward with for finalizing and taking it to the next stage for rolling this out?
Yeah, the goal is to move as quick as we can, where we can. As of right now, this is I've talked to some folks in smaller settings, but this is kind of the first one coming back to the Energy Commission to talk about it. I'm planning on also talking to the Renters Commission about it as well to get feedback from their side of things, as they, when it first came up, wasn't present, the commission. It's also planning on trying to get a couple different meetings with some of the bigger stakeholders, trying to get some stuff, Washtenaw Apartments Association and some of the other groups that kind of helped early on. But the goal is to move as quick as we can, make sure we get that information, be able to update things that are crucial to be updated and able to be updated. With the goal of moving forward as quick as we can, based on some of the other legislative items and such from there.
So as I apologize, I left this out, but so moving forward, is there any input at this time that OSI will consider as far as making modifications to the program?
Yeah, I mean, where possible. I mean, some of the the big overarching structures, some of the stuff that's in place is in place because of that's what we are able to do legally, and we might not be able to change much outside of that. But for especially a lot of the different some of the different things in the point structures, some of the stuff again that the materials that were passed along with some of the comments were like, hey, you said this thing, that's not actually the thing you're trying to say. This is what you'd say. Things like that. Those absolutely can be updated. So yeah, some of the bigger structural things might be kind of difficult at this time, just because we got that feedback, we've incorporated that feedback, and then we've updated it to the best we can, again based on legal guidance. But yeah, some of that other stuff can definitely be tweaked if it needs to be tweaked.
Okay, that's really important. I think that still be an opening for this, because there are some important changes that do need to be made, and we have to definitely balance the legality of it, the defensibility of it, and then the impact of what we're working to accomplish here. I do need to leave the meeting early today. I'm really sorry that I can't be here for the entire meeting, but thank you so much for allowing to have input on this.
Thank you. And I know you're jumping in with others. Please send me emails, anything like that. If you have input, I'm happy to take those.
Thank you. And if I could just follow up briefly too on the question as well. Joe, would you be able to just comment briefly on, with particular respect to the guidelines, of how those might be updated in the future, or what the process might be for that, whether it's based on other programs that have run like this in the past, or what the plan is currently for this program? Because it seems like a little bit of that is baked into some of the guidelines, which I could imagine being a source of learning as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, so basically there's in the packet there's some of those different materials, the one that forgot what I call it, I think ordinance pack part or whatever it is. The ones that are in there to an extent, so anything like the ordinance itself and what is in there, those would all, if that were to be something that needs to be updated, those are things that would have to go through council. So some of the the big things in there, like again the point totals that are required, if that needed to be changed down the line, that's something that would have to go through the council process to be changed. the things that are in the what is it called, the regulations, so green rental housing regulations, those are things that could change through the through the regulation process from the Office of Standard and Innovation. So again, if there's like things in there where it's like, hey, this is how you reach compliance with this thing, and if we're kind of going through and finding that like, hey, that doesn't work, that can kind of be updated from that. Those are how those are designed to be fixed through kind of simple things where, again, like if there's something in there and we're going through and everyone's like, you can't meet compliance because of the way you described that, we can fix that to make sure people can. But yeah, some of those like larger systematic changes, were those to be changed down the line, that's something that would have to go back through council to change.
Thank you for that clarification. Other comments or questions from commission members or council members? Commissioner Morski?
I'm breaking my promise, but I think maybe it's important. Two quick questions. In the materials provided, I didn't see any hint that the thresholds might change in the future. Is that something that has been discussed within OSI? And has the topic been broached at all with council? And then I have a second question.
Yeah, it's been discussed, and again, right now where we have the point total set is where we feel the most comfortable with in terms of all that other context. Were things to change, that would be a thing that we could potentially revisit, but again, that would have to go through the the public input, going through council and all that kind of stuff to change. So as of right now, that's where we're planning on being at and sticking at. If things were to change, that could be potentially brought up and readdressed then.
The other point that I have is I really appreciate hearing staff's reaction or comment on this. I've pointed out to others that the Pathways to 100% Renewable Energy report makes reference several times to the costs that are going to be incurred by the city, and it in turn refers to the fact that those will ultimately have to be passed on to taxpayers, meaning we're all going to have to pay what are called non-recoverable costs for buying essentially RECs or offsets for not being able to be in a situation where we have 100% renewable energy. Those costs vary by scenario. They're summarized on page something like 14 or 16 of the report. They amount to somewhere in the range of $5 to $10 million between 2024 and 2029, and then are in the range of $10 million plus in 2030. And then presumably those would drop every year as we make progress on getting cleaner electricity. That's just for the electricity side of our greenhouse gas targets. It doesn't address any of the targets or any of the RECs, I should say, or offsets that we may need because of not making progress in reducing fossil fuel consumption for transportation, for heating, etc. So if indeed we're going to be spending roughly $10 million a year, the question is, we're going to pay for this one way or the other. So shouldn't we be paying for this by making sure, instead of buying RECs or offsets, that we actually make the kinds of improvements to housing and transportation, et cetera, that really have a tangible impact on our emissions, as opposed to doing it by saying we need to meet our target. We're going to meet our target. That's something that has been repeatedly stated. I think that's a great position to take. And if indeed that's the case, but it's going to take RECs or offsets at that cost, should we be considering that when we consider the costs of a program like this to landlords that is eventually going to be passed on to tenants. So it's going to be coming out of people's pockets one way or the other. Is that a reasonable line of thinking?
I will defer that to others. I don't necessarily have a comment on my end from that perspective, but I see what you're saying. I know it's things that are being discussed, is being considered. I just do not have a perspective from my end.
Maybe we can save that as a topic for another meeting. But I think it's something that we need to always be considering in again, in this context. I see Missy has come on line, so go ahead, Missy.
I'm lurking, John, lurking in the background. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question, and there is unequivocally truth in it, and then there is some simplicity in it that, which I know you know this because you think about this a lot, that A20 is directional. It's not verbatim, right? A lot of things have changed in the ecosystem, some really good and some really challenging. And so we don't have the state policies that Governor Whitmer signed last year in here in A20 as it is, but that is part of the ecosystem that we're operating with. We also haven't identified those RECs, and the market looks different today for renewable energy than it did developing in Michigan, even siting, right? The siting policy and the siting law is fundamentally different than what it was. So this is always a trade-off that we think about, is where does the limited capital go to make the biggest impact? And some of the things we probably don't talk a lot about with you all are the soft things, like the regulatory interventions for the Public Service Commission, because if we get a win there, that win cascades and is so much more effective than a dollar, like ROI per dollar invested. I don't even know how we calculate it, right? The attorney fees maybe is how we would do that. So that's a convoluted way of saying, I think it is always right to keep what you're saying front of mind, but I think we have to do it dynamically, given the context we're in the moment, as opposed to where we were 4 years ago when we adopted the plan. Does that make sense?
I think what I'd like to do is sort of steer discussion now, and I'm possibly looking at Joe for a slight clarification on this with respect to the resolution that was also included as part of the packet. I'd like to open for any comments, particularly on the text of the resolution, but I think the plan was not necessarily to, my sense is that there's not a lot to that we necessarily need to adjust, in part because I think Joe probably updated that from the time that it was initially introduced, and we can also gather any comments or updates to that text via comments from commissioners separately. But if we were to reintroduce the resolution on the agenda, perhaps for a vote at the next meeting, for example, I just wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to discuss anything that was important at this meeting before doing that.
Yeah, I think that's fine. If folks have comments on it, again, we're not voting on it tonight. But if you have any comments, you see anything wrong with it or anything like that, yeah, you can either let us know now, or if you have more chance to read it and send in the comments, we can do that later. So, but it is there. If folks have comments, happy to hear them.
Yeah, and so just to give an indication, like given the feedback and given the sort of tenor of discussion, I think everyone please share comments and feedback with the OSI team and Joe, and I think that there will probably be some updates, and perhaps we can do that through communication with the commissioners between now and the next meeting. And what I'd like to do is reintroduce the resolution in the what month is it? October Energy Commission meeting, for potentially for a vote on that resolution as well. So just to give a sense of where this might be going. Thanks, everyone. And I just want to thank Joe in particular, because I know he's shouldered quite a bit of the last 2 commission meetings. I think both in terms of presenting and fielding questions and really being able to respond and carry a lot of these things forward. So thank you, Joe, for all of that. And with that, maybe we can move on to the staff report.
Yeah, that is also me. Find the right thing. Okay. Apologies, I have a few because there's so many things going on. And I'm probably not catching them all. I didn't even know we were in a meeting earlier today, and Missy said there was only, I think, 3 days this month that we don't have an OSI. So lots going on. Yeah, did just want to run through. So one, Green Fair is coming up. I know a lot of you are familiar with it and have been out to it. But noting Green Fair, our annual event featuring over 80 exhibitors advancing sustainable living with information about renewable energy, energy waste reduction, circular economy, local food system, all things A20 that I could keep listing for a while here. But just noting that takes place on Friday, September 20th, 5 to 8 p.m. on Main Street in downtown Ann Arbor. All the details, including some of the special activities and a full list of the exhibitors, is available at a2gov.org/greenfair. Sticking on Green Fair, the Green Energy Neighbors, who are a group that came out of the A20 Ambassadors Program, they will be tabling there at Green Fair. And what they do is they'll be sharing their personal experiences with residential decarbonization. They are also looking for interested residents who have done some form of efficiency, electrification, or renewable energy adoption to join their efforts in sharing experience with their community. So folks can just have a broader resource to be able to reach out to and talk to about some of these things. And if folks are interested, they can reach out to me and I can get you in contact with them. With the goal of increasing the availability of publicly accessible EV chargers, our commercial EV charger program now provides an opportunity for commercial and multifamily property owners in Ann Arbor to receive up to 4 free level 2 EV chargers. Folks can learn more about this program and view and submit an application at osi.a2gov.org/EV charger program. Couple quick just kind of updates on some of the programs that we've talked about previously. For the Home Energy Advisor, we had a really great swell of interest at the beginning, and we were on a wait list for a little bit. But just noting that they fully worked through the wait list, the portal's now open to sign up, and folks can receive their free custom home decarbonization plan, which folks can do through the a20hea.org. Additionally, with the home energy rebates, we have now put up a real-time dashboard that residents can quickly see the status of the different local Ann Arbor rebates that are available. They can see which are available, which are exhausted, and can help give folks a better sense of what rebates are still there and feel comfortable with initiating their sustainability-focused projects. There are a lot of rebates that are still available, particularly the ones that aren't the reserved rebate. They're just the ones that are on the first come, first serve. So there are a lot of those still available, which you can see on that again at osi.a2gov.org/rebates. Additionally, we were awarded $2.8 million to expand equitable access to public EV charging through a grant, which again, you can learn more about at a2gov.org/EVs. Another fun event coming up. We had our one of our sister cities, Tübingen, Germany, is going to be here next week. One of the events that's taking place with them, you can hear from their Lord Mayor Palmer of Tübingen, Germany, as he shares what they're up to equitably address the climate crisis in their community and how it can help shape Ann Arbor's A20 initiative. It'll be an interactive session that provides a unique opportunity to hear directly from representatives from one of our sister cities about their work to make Tübingen one of the more sustainable cities in the world. This will be taking place Wednesday, September 18th, 6 to 7:30 p.m. at the Ann Arbor District Library's downtown branch. Also noting the city has released a request for proposal for the Phase 2 municipalization study with responses due by October 11th, 2024. And we've also released a request for information on sustainable energy utility support services, which can be found on the city's procurement website with all responses due by September 20th, 2024 at 4 p.m. Lastly, and then I will be done, we'll have a sustainable lawn care learning session, which is for homeowners, lawn care service providers, or property managers interested in learning more about electric lawn care or sustainability in general. This will be on October 21st at Cobblestone Farm from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m., where folks can see electric lawn care equipment in action, hear from lawn care service providers and experts about their experiences with electric equipment and pollinator-aware practices, get questions answered, view live electric lawn care equipment demonstrations. And for anyone who's interested, can RSVP. There's an online one, but you can send me an email. and I will get you connected with that. And before I turn it over, Missy has something as well.
Yeah, awesome. And I'm sorry, y'all. I know this is a lot. Joe did mention we have a lot of events this month. There were a few that didn't get grabbed that I want to let you know about. We also have the local food festival that is on the 26th. So I think that's right. Yep, that's on the 26th. Our free tree giveaway, I think we might have a few trees still left. That will also be coming up. So the free tree giveaway itself will be on the 21st, but you register now for those actual saplings. They go hot and fast. And then two last things I wanted to share with you all. Our AmeriCorps members are getting ready to hit pavement. So they're going to knock on every door in the city of Ann Arbor to make sure people know about A20 and the programs we're talking about. Hopefully we'll be doing this twice a year going forward to have more interactions with people on the doorstep. But if you do hear this, your neighbors talking about it, it is true. We will be out in the field. And then lastly, hot off the press, this isn't finalized yet. We're waiting on the administrative law judge and the MPSC to make their ruling. But we have intervened for the first time ever in a series of gas cases. And the gas depreciation case, a very captivating case, I might say, it's pretty tedious. But we argued that we needed to have a future of gas proceedings, similar to what you've seen in New York, Massachusetts, Minnesota, where we really are pushing the gas utility to understand what comes next. And that way we can protect ratepayers and make sure we're not sinking investments in an asset that is just not going to be around. And the judge agreed. So if the MPSA takes it, we will have been the only intervener. And in fact, the other interveners didn't understand what we were doing and fought us. And so we would have won a future of gas for the entire territory. So fingers crossed, we'll let you know when that's real, but hot off the press, you're some of the first to know.
What do you mean about the entire territory?
DT and consumers would likely have to do for their entire system. What comes after gas?
Bless you.
Thanks, Peck.
Thank you for all those updates, and congratulations on the awards, and thanks again for all the hard work that the OSI team's been doing. It's great to hear. Let's move on to a report from how about council members, city council.
Thanks. I will be relatively brief, considering that they just covered a ton. But one of the pieces that I wanted to highlight were a few of the things that council has worked on the last couple of meetings that might be of interest. You may remember the leaf blower ban that was put into effect a couple of probably months ago at this point. We did have to make some adjustments to that. I know that it's relatively small in terms of the amount of carbon output, but one of the things that we ultimately found through city testing was that unfortunately the commercial leaf blowers that are available, electric commercial leaf blowers that are available right now are not meeting our needs for being able to do controlled burns in the city. And so we had to make an exception around controlled burns specifically, obviously for safety reasons there, but also to make sure that the controlled burn program can continue to happen. We would actually like to be able to do a lot more controlled burns throughout the year, but if we pursued without doing the exception, we either would have probably had to stop the program or we would have actually fallen even further behind where we would like to be. So that was an amendment that we had to make. Another thing that is not like immediately impactful, but could potentially be helpful into the future as we look towards reducing vehicle miles traveled and trying to do more kind of placemaking within neighborhoods and things like that, is that we passed a resolution at the last council meeting to explore increased flexibility around accessory commercial units. So you'll remember that the city did accessory dwelling units a while back. One of the things that we're looking at is more about how you can support your startup business or your idea in your community or in your neighborhood. And so that's something that we're looking at. We know that as we're looking to try to create more walkable neighborhoods where folks might be able to choose other options than driving all over the city, that this is a potential tool that we want to explore a little bit more. And so that's something that we're looking at as well. That was just a resolution at this point, asking staff to explore it further as we continue planning. But just wanted to put that on your radar as something else that we're working on.
Thank you. Are there any updates from the Environmental Commission?
Did you say Environmental Commission?
Yes, Commissioner.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, again, my internet is a little bit unstable. Yes. First of all, the Environmental Commission had two presentations focusing on natural features issues. First was conserving native forest fragments in the city. A gentleman from the University of Michigan, affiliated with Mathi and Nichols Arboretum, presented on that. And that's important because forest fragments are one of Ann Arbor's few and significant natural carbon sinks. So there was a presentation on that, and then there was a presentation on deer impacts in Ann Arbor. As everyone probably remembers, Ann Arbor used to have a deer cull. Funding for that was cut, and the Environmental Commission will be considering whether or not to recommend that funds for that be reinstated. The only other thing I wanted to say is echo Commissioner OSI on weighing in on with the MPSC on natural gas. That's fantastic. There's a really well-known business consultant, philosopher, probably one of the best known of the 20th century, Deming, and he said that leaders should be working on the system to improve it continuously and not working in where OSI's. That's fantastic news, and it's really working on the system, and it potentially has congratulatory comments from Commissioner Peck. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Okay, I don't believe we have any other updates. Seeing no hands raised, we'll move to the last moment for public input. And this is an opportunity for people to speak for up to 3 minutes. If you're watching on CTN, please call 888-788-0099 or 877-853-5247 and enter meeting ID 956-8718-7876. This information is also displayed on the meeting agenda and video feed. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand one by one using the last 3 digits of your phone number. To electronically raise your hand to indicate your desire to speak, please press *9 on your phone. You will hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. When speaking, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we may hear you clearly. And please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Caller ending in 411.
Hello, I'm assuming I'm being heard. This is Erwin Weingarten, 1411 Granger. I am a property manager in town. I support, just, John Mirsky's comments. He puts a lot of thought into what he said. Also, I am another landlord who cares and wants to do the right thing. So we need to be careful when we talk about landlords cherry picking to pad. Let's assume that all people are trying to do the right thing and want to do the right thing. And that's why it is important to me. There were questions asked about can the program be, how can it be changed if you realize there's a need? And the answer was a little distressing, I have to say, because it seemed, what I heard was, well, a lot of it's been vetted through legal, and that's what I've been told the last 2.5 years when I've asked to be involved, is that, well, it's going through legal. So I'm getting a feeling that a policy gets approved, it's going to be hard to change anything. Likewise, which is why it makes it difficult to listen to some of the answers that I've heard. They said, well, we've consulted experts and we've consulted with landlords. Well, you know what? I'd feel a lot more comfortable if you'd actually list them and put references down on those slides. You need to add references because you haven't proven to me that any of the how the items on the checklist are actually going to make a difference. And I'm a quantifiable person. You should know I am a member of the 2030 district. And one of the things that makes us different than, for example, regular LEED is we ask for numbers and proof, not just lip service. So I think you need to do that. Other thing is a landlord, the city needs to make sure
30
that
seconds.
It updates its policies with time. For example, there are documents that we are required to supply to tenants. All tenants, everyone should have access to the internet these days, and I should be able to give them a lead pamphlet online. I should be able to do likewise, I should be able to do a training online, tenant training, and that should be acceptable. So
You're at 3 minutes.
Need to make
Thank
sure
you. Thank you. No further callers. I will note, if folks refer to in the attachments, there is a file called the Green Rental Checklist Methodology. It does have a lot of the information on how those numbers were determined. I didn't attach to here, but I can provide as well the overall work that went into creating that as well, if that would be helpful.
That might be very useful for folks if you're able to mail that out. That might be useful for folks. And I want to thank all the callers who called and made comments today as well. The last item, aside from adjournment, is any items for the next agenda. Commissioner Murski.
I mentioned in the last meeting, I mentioned again this time, I'd like to see a presentation of the annual greenhouse gas inventory, as well as OSI's performance measures dashboard. In the past, we've always reviewed that in August. The earliest we would do it now is in October. So hopefully we can do that soon. The other thing that I would ask be considered, maybe not near term, but this whole topic was related basically to efficiency disclosures and driving ECMs, energy conservation measures, and renewable energy. One component of that, as Joe showed, is the commercial benchmarking. That ordinance was passed with a clause that says that there's supposed to be an annual report issued on that. We should have had 2 reports. I'm not aware of those being posted anywhere, but if we're passing these kinds of ordinances and we're saying we're writing reports, I think it's really important that we do a check function where we go back and look at takeaways and lessons learned. And hopefully those reports are doing that and would allow us to evaluate progress that's being made in the commercial area, as well as the ordinance and any tweaks that might be made to that. So those are my requests for future agenda items.
Sorry, Peck, I see. If I can respond real quick. I just wanted to note a couple of things. One, if I think I've mentioned this before, if I haven't, my apologies. Again, noting that the person who had previously been doing our greenhouse gas inventory and did the city's performance, or OSI's performance metrics dashboard, did leave the team earlier this year. We've just hired someone in to kind of fill that role. But as that person did, one, not do the greenhouse gas inventory, nor did they do that original process of it. They don't have that context at this time. So we are not planning on doing a presentation on that. I can direct people to the materials. I can walk through the materials, but like I said, we don't for this year have someone who's able to do that. But we can get you to those things, and we'll definitely be doing that in future years. Also noting with the benchmarking, like I said, don't have those reports. From my understanding, there was issues they were working through on getting. Right now, we're very, very heavily investing in getting everything updated on benchmarking. Our staff person who's been working on that, they're currently in the final phases of compliance for this year. There were some extensions that needed to be done, and his time is incredibly overspent on benchmarking right now from where it should be, trying to get all these buildings into compliance. And that's kind of the first focus. Once he has gotten the buildings into compliance, once we are there, that's when we'll be looking to do the report, hopefully, again.
Commissioner Overbeck?
Yes, thank you, Joe, for all the work going into this meeting. I'd also be very interested in, and it's unless someone else sees a reason not to do this, I would love to have a list presented of the challenges that OSI sees in meeting the goals of net zero in ranked order, and then have us use that as a discussion vehicle to get a sense of, and maybe what we need is a ranking of, annotated a little, so we have an idea of what the challenge is, how serious is it, and then we can go through them and really help you brainstorm or find others that can help us brainstorm each of those challenges. So it's taking it's essentially an assessment of where we stand and where we're going. I think everyone on the call here today probably feels like, no fault of yours or OSI's, we're going too slow. The whole planet is going too slow. But I think Ann Arbor provides a real opportunity to show the world how you do it, and to do it in a real world context. And it would be good for us to really make sure we're doing all we can. And I think this is a way, with University of Michigan's commitment to doing a lot more in the climate space, maybe to help, at least one benefit might be to help get the University of Michigan to help with some of these in a more serious way. But I also think there are going to be other folks, other entities that can help us in a serious way. Just an idea.
Thanks. That's a great suggestion to help us, I think, throughout this as we're sort of navigating how to shape the agendas moving forward too, and in support of council and OSI and all the work. Anything else from commission members, council members? Once again, please feel. Oh, yep.
Sorry.
Yep.
One more. It's been a long time since I've done a meeting like this where every single face is a male. We really do need to diversify this committee. But anyhow, I understand that's a hard thing to do sometimes.
We still have to.
Everyone's here tonight.
Right?
Sorry.
John, you broke up when you were talking.
I said we still have 2 openings that would have not been filled.
Let's make a priority maybe to think of who we can get. It doesn't look like us.
Councilmember Dina.
Yeah, and I just want on that front, I spoke with Mayor Taylor at the end of our last council meeting about some of the vacancies, and I know that we're having some discussions about getting the commissions filled and what that looks like going forward. With respect to this, I think we also had a new vacancy that occurred this morning. So we have another person that has left the commission, and so we want to make sure that we're looking at, because we're also getting close to potential quorum issues if we start missing people, and so we need to start looking at what we do. So I will continue talking to him, but to the extent that anyone knows of folks that should apply, one of the things that we are often lacking is diverse applicants when trying to fill positions on commissions. So please encourage people to apply if you know folks. And that goes for all commissions, not necessarily just this one.
Okay. Thank you everyone for your time in preparing for the meeting and for the time you're going to put towards preparation also over the next month. And I know there's a number of follow-ups with a few of you as well in terms of different comments and things like that. So I just want to say thank you, and looking forward. It's 7:48, and so as chair, I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good week.